I like these books. What I like about these books, the first one. Hello friends, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Kat, and today we're talking about all the books that I read in November and all the books that I want to read in December. In November, I launched an event called Neurovember. The idea was to have a month-long readathon around neurodiversity, how the brain works, how the mind works, neuroscience, mental health, all those topics around neurology and again our brains and our minds. And I wanted to draw special attention to neurodivergence because it's a topic that I care a lot about. And for this challenge, there was a whole set of rules with a bingo card that you could try to fill. In order to win, you just had to read 2 books, one fiction, one non-fiction, related to the topics of Neurovember, and to try to complete a column, a row, or a diagonal. Because I launched that event and I can't control myself, I tried to black out the whole board. So this month I read 7 books in total. I also DNF'd 2 and started 2 more. So I'm going to talk about all of those and then also the ones that I want to read next month. So I'll start with the DNFs because those are where I probably have the least to say. The first one was How to Do Nothing by Jenny Odell, and I didn't end up counting that for Neurovember because that book was really not what I was expecting. I think the title is quite confusing or just at least promising something that you're not getting. I don't think this is a how-to book. It felt very much more like a philosophy essay, and so it was just not what I was expecting, but also not what I was looking for, which is why I DNF'd it. To be honest, I still don't really know what it's about. I think it talks about how to do nothing, but also still kind of challenge the attention economy, be kind of an activist in a way. It wasn't really clear to me, and also because it's not what I was looking for at the time and I was listening on audiobook, I was not paying as much attention, like I was not super invested, which is why I DNF'd it. It doesn't mean that it's not a good book, it's just not that what I wanted at the time. And then the other one is How to ADHD by Jessica McCabe. And this one, I think I read about 45%, and I still think it's a very good book. It's a soft DNF for me. It's just that I was reading it on ebook format, and it's a very practical book. It's, in this case, a real how-to book. And so I think I would have gotten more out of it if I had it in physical format and I was more able to take notes and just like play more with the content. So I'm still counting it for Neurovember because it's my game, I make the rules, and I needed to complete my board. But yeah, I'm hoping to be able to go back to this book a bit later and just finish it because I think, again, it's still very high quality. There's just lots of good tips and recommendation in there. So I definitely recommend it. And it was just a mismatch in terms of format for me. I would have preferred to have it in physical form. I used How to ADHD for 3 prompts in the November board, which are published in 2024, Brain on the Cover, and Neurodivergent author. Now moving on to the books that I actually finished. The first one was Lady of Dragons by Shelby Elizabeth, and this was a book that I got through the Stuff Your Kindle Day specialized on fantasy. And I was really excited about this book because we are following a character who wants to be a knight, meaning that she's going to be a dragon rider. And part of it is set in a dragon sanctuary. There is romance. The book was labeled as having neurodivergence rep, LGBTQIA plus rep, BIPOC rep, disability rep. I was just like, wow, this is like a very diverse cast of characters that I was hoping for. And again, the premise was pretty cool. So I was very excited to give it a go and knock off quite a bit of the Neurovember prompts thanks to it. In the end, I am not counting it for Neurovember because I'm still looking for the neurodivergence rep. I really don't know where it is. There was like nothing that really kind of caught my attention on that front, and I don't know how those kind of labelings work on the Stuff Your Kindle Day. I don't know if it's the author saying about it or if it's someone else, but yeah, for me, I didn't really see clear ND rep in there, so that's enough to knock off the book. But also it says there is disability rep, but basically they're just like one minor character who has a limp. And then for BIPOC rep, there is one minor character who is Black. And then I'm also still looking for the LGBTQIA plus representation as well. So I was quite disappointed on that front. I still enjoy my reading experience. I think it was entertaining to read, but there were also tropes in the book that I didn't really enjoy. Not that I have a problem with this trope, but there was like kind of this trial thing, or like the character needs to complete certain tasks in order to enter like the school to become like a knight. And I thought the tasks were not realistic or not credible at all. Also, what bothered me with the book was kind of the casual fat phobia. Basically, there is one character, you understand very quickly that he's not a nice person, and there's kind of a few comments coming regularly about him having like a big belly and things like that. And it's kind of the one physical trait that is repeated about him. Otherwise, we don't really know anything about him apart that he has this bulging belly, and it's kind of not described in a nice way. So that made me feel a bit icky. So I don't think I will be continuing with the series. It was fine when I read it. I had an overall fine time. It was entertaining enough that I wanted to finish it. But there were a few parts where I felt it fell down. Also, like the motivation for the antagonist in the book, I felt didn't make any sense. So it felt very forced and contrived, and more like characters were a bit like puppets to fit the plot rather than having real depth. So yeah, overall, I'm not gonna continue with the series, and that was not a frank success for me with this book. The next one I read though was a really, really good read. It was The Bees by Lillian Paul, and it was narrated by Ola Cassidy. I'm counting this book for Other Species and Fantasy/SF for the Neurovember bingo board. It was excellent. I was really surprised by this book. So the premise is that we are following Flora 717, who is a sanitation bee in a hive. So she's supposed to be a cleaner, but because of certain physical attributes and also unexpected capabilities that she has, her destiny ends up veering away from one of a simple sanitation bee, and she gets to see things and get access to different parts of the hive that she wouldn't normally have. So we follow her and her journey through the different areas of the hive and different roles of the bees within this hive. And it was so interesting. From the little research I did on this book, apparently the aspect of the bee's behavior is quite accurate, so it was quite interesting to see. But obviously it's also a novel. It's a kind of fantasy sci-fi novel, and you get so invested. It was really, really fun to read, and nothing like I have ever read before. So I'm very keen to pick up the author's other book, which is Pod, about dolphins. That sounds so interesting as well. So yeah, I highly recommend it. I thought it was very unique and original and very well done. Next, I read another audiobook, which is Strong Female Character by Fern Brady, narrated by Fern Brady herself. And this counts as my biography, mental health, and out of my comfort zone prompts for the Neurovember board. It was a short audiobook, but I really enjoyed it. Initially, I wanted to count it as a fun read because Fern Brady is a comedian, but that book is actually quite heavy in terms of themes, and she tells kind of the story of her autism and how it impacted her in her life and how she struggle to get a diagnosis, how she was told that there was no way she could be autistic because she's had boyfriends and she was able to make eye contact, but also all the mental health struggles that brought, because she always felt like she didn't fit in, she didn't understand some of the social norms, and yeah, it was a real struggle. And so kind of her story at points is quite a difficult one to listen to, but I thought she did a great job first narrating it and just like sharing the emotions, sharing the struggles, but not also making it into a sob story, and bringing a lot of awareness and a lot of insights and self-reflection about what it means to be autism and why some kind of behaviors sometimes might be misinterpreted from neurotypical people, or her kind of interpretation of why, for example, some autistic women seek jobs like being a stripper, for example, and kind of why, like, sometimes it's that fact is told from a not a critical, but just like, oh, like those poor women kind of angle. And Fern Brady explains what these women find in those kind of professions, how it's actually full of accommodations to their needs as autistic women, and how kind of the general point of view is actually taking away their agency, and how she disagrees with that. I thought that was really interesting. Again, I think it's full of interesting insights, and it was a fantastic read. I'm really happy that I read it and really enjoyed it as well, even though again it's not always a light one, to say the least. I also read Afrotistic by Kala Allen Omeza. This was on ebook, and this is a YA novel about Noah, who is a young autistic girl who is also Black, and how she struggles to reconcile the two. And we follow her as she starts at a new school. She has the objective to make it to the Dean Merit Society. I think that's a very US thing. We don't really have that in France, but I think it's just like when you have very, very good grades, you get that recognition. In order to get into that society, like kind of elite student thing, she needs to get some leadership experience. In order to get that, she starts a group for other autistic kids and students who feel like they're different and don't necessarily fit in. And obviously, she learns a lot from that. She has this kind of found family, she makes friends and all of that. I counted this book for my BIPOC Red Prompt younger audience and neurodivergent main character. I'm a bit conflicted about this one because I feel like I need to separate the book as a literary enterprise and also as almost like a neurodivergence awareness tool. In novel terms, or in terms of it being a novel, I didn't really enjoy it that much, to be honest. I quite enjoyed it in the beginning, and then after a while I felt like it became quite boring. Not that much happens, and sometimes we get a bit lost in the nitty-gritty of things, of just like how they did set up their meetings with this person joining in, being in person, and this other person joining online, and stuff like that, and how they had tech issues and it took half the session. And it's very much like tell, and not much showing sometimes. And it's kind of Noah, the main character, kind of telling us what happened. And so that for me made the story a bit boring and feeling like not much happened, to be honest. So yeah, as a novel, I didn't really enjoy it that much. As a learning tool, I think it was interesting. Like, I learned things about autism that I didn't know, and I enjoy reading from a autistic character's perspective. But yeah, it's hard for me to have, like, to reconcile the two. Like, I don't want to be too harsh on this book because I think it's still doing something that's important. But for me, first of all, I was not the primary audience. And like, yeah, I don't think it was a very strong novel on a few fronts. At the same time, I say I'm not the primary audience, but there are other YA books that I thoroughly enjoyed. So yeah, again, I'm a bit bit conflicted about Afrotistic, but I'm hoping that still people will pick it up and learn things and hopefully enjoy it more than I did. Moving on to a non-fiction book, which was added from my initial TBR, because again, I thought that The Lady of Dragons would knock off a lot of prompts and it didn't, so I ended up picking up a lot more books than I initially thought I would. So this one is The Mind's Eye by Oliver Sacks, and it is a collection of essays from Oliver Sacks, who is a famous neurologist, and so he have seen in his career a lot of patients with very different and sometimes very extreme neurological conditions. And so this book focuses on things related to sight mainly. I thought there was a lot of interesting stories in there, and I think one of the main takeaway from this book is just how flexible the brain actually is and how it can adapt. Because I think for me, losing my sight is what sounds like one of the scariest things. Like, obviously as humans, like, it's our primary sense. It's normally the one that we rely the most on, contrary to other species, like dogs rely more on their smell, for example. So obviously, I think I'm probably not the only one in this position of just like imagining losing my sight sounds absolutely horrifying. And so you read those stories about those people who lost the ability to see or lost the ability to recognize faces or objects. Like, again, there's like a variety of different conditions, and how they adapted to that, how their brain managed to develop other extraordinary abilities to compensate for their loss of sight, and how also like their mindset and how they were showing resilience and wanting to overcome that disability that suddenly came upon them. Selfishly, it felt a little bit reassuring, seeing again how the brain can be flexible and how you can adapt. It doesn't completely take away the fear, but again, it was very interesting to read and quite fascinating. So yeah, it was kind of a surprise because I had not planned to pick up this book. I just found it a bit randomly in a bookshop in Milan. And in terms of prompts, I used it for bodies and for real because it was a non-fiction book. Yeah, I actually quite enjoyed it. So that was The Mind's Eye by Oliver Sacks. I also watched the documentary Life Undertakes Me, and I will put the name of the directors because I forgot to put it in my notes. I used that for the other media in translation and other location prompts. This is a short 40-minute documentary about refugee children who experience resignation syndrome, which is basically a coma-like condition where basically they have experienced such trauma that their body kind of resigns in a way. And we follow those families, and in Sweden, where there are more cases than in other countries. And it was quite interesting. At the same time, it felt a bit like I wanted to know more. And I think it's kind of one of the challenges with this condition is that we don't really understand it yet. Why it happens, why some children fall into that kind of despair and why others don't, and why it's so prevalent in Sweden. I was interested to learn more about this, and so I'm happy that I watched the documentary, but again, it doesn't bring much answers. It brings more questions than it brings answers, and so I felt a bit like I wanted more from it. So the next one is one that I read physically, and it's Comme un oiseau dans un bocal by Lou Luby. This is a French graphic novel. So we are following Birdo and Raya, who are two characters who both have high intellectual potential, but it manifests in different ways. I like this book because it presents the two types of giftedness. I don't know the terms in English, but the first one is laminaire, which I have no idea how to translate, and the other one is the complex one. And so it manifests in different ways. Normally, when you do an IQ test, usually the norm is that your scores will be fairly consistent. So if you're highly gifted, then you will have high scores everywhere. And that would be the laminar version of giftedness. And then you have more rare cases where actually the scores are very irregular. And so that's the complex version. And so people with the complex version of giftedness are more on the creative side rather than like very logical for the laminar ones. They're usually very invested into the language theory, for example. And so the book talks about a little bit of those differences, what the IQ test actually is, how it kind of works, what it measures. One interesting fact, for example, is that your IQ score is not a fundamental value. It's a placement compared to the rest of the population. So I think that was interesting. The book also talks about what is intelligence, what does that giftedness diagnosis means, and like diagnosis isn't even really the right term because it's not a disease or anything. So yeah, I really like how it uses fiction and those two characters to explain in very simple ways things that are very concrete but still hard to define. I really love this book. It was a reread for me. I read it a year ago and I still enjoyed it as much, made me cry a little bit. If you read French, I highly recommend it. And I used this one for the sensitivity and neurodivergence rep because it talks about a form of neurodivergence that isn't autism or ADHD, which are the two that are most talked about at the moment. And then the final book that I read was a real surprise. I would have not picked it up if it was not for this Neurovember challenge. And I'm so glad I did because I absolutely loved it. It is Cemetery Boys by Aidan Thomas and narrated by Avi Roque. It's a YA kind of fantasy novel, and we are following Yadriel, who is a young trans boy living in a family of brujex, which are basically people who can see the dead, and they're from the Latinx community, so they celebrate Dia de Muertos, which has a big part to play in the book. And so Yadriel, because he's trans, is not recognized by his family as a brujo. So basically in this community, if you are a woman, you are a bruja and you have healing powers. And if you are a brujo, you have different kind of powers. You can summon a spirit, you can release the spirit to the afterlife. And so because he's trans, Yadriel is not recognized as a brujo, and so he wants to prove himself to his family and be accepted for who he is, and so he tries summoning a spirit, which ends up being Julian, a boy from his school, which is supposed to be quite a bad boy, potentially part of a gang, and there's like all those prejudices and misconceptions about him. We follow their journey as they're also trying to solve a mystery. I'm not doing this book justice trying to summarize the story, but it was truly fantastic. I guessed fairly easily and quite early a good part of the mystery, but to be honest, that's not even the best part of the book. The characters are amazing. The magic system is super intriguing. I loved learning more about the Latinx community and Dia de los Muertos and those traditions. And yeah, I love the characters so much. I loved what the book was doing in terms of challenging prejudices, raising awareness about what it means to be trans, the relationship between Yadriel and Julian. I just loved it so much. I cried, it was fantastic. And again, like a total surprise. I was not expecting to like this book as much as I did. I was just trying to find a book that would fit the last few prompts that I was missing for the challenge. And I think I found probably my favorite book of the year, at least so far. So yeah, I'm so happy about it. I haven't heard anyone talk about this book, and I'm really surprised. I really want more people to read it. So yeah, Cemetery Boys, it was fantastic. It's written by an author who is Latinx and trans, and the narrator as well is Latinx and trans. And also he did a fantastic job. Like I think I really recommend the audiobook because the narrator was amazing, and at the end there is a short interview or like exchange between the author and the narrator, which was so lovely, really moving. And so apparently the narrator is an actor, and it was his first audiobook. And I was just like mind blown because he did such a good job. So now I want to listen more of his other audiobooks, and I want to read more books from this author. So yeah, I'm really excited about Cemetery Boys. It's like a lovely read. I really enjoyed it. So I used it for Neurospice, LGBTQIA+, a fun read, and I chose it for my free space as well because it was my favorite read of the month. Those are all the books I read for Neurovember. If you followed, you will see that I still have a few prompts missing. So it's narrowing the title, critical thinking, and a short read. And those three, I'm using Empire of Normality by Robert Chapman. And I've started this book in November, but I haven't been able to finish it before the end of the month. So I'm going to be finishing it in December, but that I'm also counting it for November, even though I'm not entirely finished yet. So that's the first book on my December TBR. And then moving out of Neurovember, I also started The Final Empire, which is a buddy read with my friend Rochelle. So this is the first in the Mistborn trilogy by Brandon Sanderson that I've been wanting to read for a month. So I started this one already. I'm a few chapters in, but I'm just at the beginning. So this is my second big read for December. And then I have a few others that I want to get to in December as well. So if you've been watching my channel and like my 24 before the end of 2024 video, especially, I said that I wanted to read a Swedish book before the end of the year. So I started listening to Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros in Swedish. So I've already read it or listened to it in English, also in Spanish. Now I'm doing it in Swedish because I wanted something easy just to practice my Swedish. I'm not really having to pay that much attention to the plot. It's really just for the language that I'm doing it. And so I can be a bit off, like I like to listen to it before falling asleep. But it's still like a 20+ hours audiobook. So that's going to be good for my language practice. There's a lot to listen to. So it's been translated into Swedish by Åsa Kempe, and it's narrated by Siham Shurafa. And then I also want to read The Two Dr. Gorskys by Isaac Fellman, which I don't know a lot about the plot. I think we're following Anne, who is doing a PhD in magic/psychiatry, and she's studying mental health and trauma under a mysterious professor. So I'm very curious about it. It's a book that was recommended by Steph from the Steph Morgan channel, and I'm very excited about it. I also want to get to Unmasking Autism by Devon Price, which I'm buddy reading with Hannah. And then the final one is Orbital by Samantha Harvey, which won the Booker Prize this year. That's not what I want to read it. I don't really care about prizes. When I read the blurb, I knew immediately that I wanted to read it. It's very short. It's about astronauts in a spacecraft orbiting around the Earth and their life up there. And so I just found that fascinating. And it's also this month's pick for Christy and Jones Book Club. So that's also what decided me to put it on the TBR for this month. Whew. Now I need to catch my breath and get to some more reading because that's quite the program for the end of the year. But I'm quite excited about it. Let me know in the comments below what you read for Neurovember, if you read anything. Is there any book from the one I talked about that you are especially excited about? And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.